Hey guys, it's PH here again. Because I'm pretty interested in theoretical politics, I wanted to do another video on my political views. As I've said before, I'm pretty much a libertarian, but I wanted to go over some of my specific views and explain them. I've also said before on this channel that the purpose of my videos is not to encourage or appeal to libertarians, but to share my views and opinions on certain topics and see if I can change anyone's mind. Now, I believe that there are multiple sides to politics. There are some sides to politics which I think are pretty objective, and which you can either be right or wrong with. I usually think this way about movements. I think I'm pretty much objectively right on some of my views on feminism, Black Lives Matter, etc., because I deem those hypocritical, and I think my views and intentions are more pure than theirs. However, there's also indisputably personal politics. While I think deciding objective politics is about who's right, subjective politics is a little deeper, and more about what you think is more important. For instance, two parties may be different, but have the same end goal intentions. Let's say both parties strive for the end goal of equality, but they have different values and agendas, different ways of achieving that goal. I think that one of these parties must be inherently better than the other. That party would be the one that gets to that end goal most efficiently and reasonably, without abandoning any of their already important values. This is perfect grounds for a debate. Both parties can present their ideas to decide whose party is more reasonable. If one of these parties contradicts themselves, proving to be hypocritical, then that is an inherent problem with their system. But both of these parties are grounded in the same ideology. Now, let's examine a situation where two parties have different goals or values. They can compete, but neither one will prove itself to be inherently better or worse than the other. If their belief is their subjective set of morals, then neither one of these groups, no matter how different, is any more moral than the other. One group may strive for equality, while the other group strives for freedom. In this sense, both of these groups can be right at the same time. Both of these can be argued as important virtues, but you can't prove objectively whether freedom or equality is more important. It's completely up to the individual. So now that I've gone through that, I'm going to take a quiz on politics to show my opinions on various national issues. I'll go in depth on each question to explain why I take the stance I have. The quiz I'm going to be taking is on istandwith.com. I've taken it before, and I'm really satisfied with it. It was a great informer for me to decide what political candidate I agreed with most for the past election on political issues. I encourage you to check out the website if you're interested at all in this sort of thing. The link will be in the description. And alright, I'm going to get into it. First question is about abortion. Now, while a lot of people take a really quick stance on this, I think it's actually a very complicated issue. For one thing, I'm socially liberal, and I'm an atheist. A lot of people with my views are very pro-choice. I consider myself at value a pro-choice person, because I think everyone has the right to make any decision they want as long as it's not getting in the way of anyone else's rights. However, it can be argued that abortion does infringe on someone else's rights, the baby's. I think anyone should be able to do anything with their own body and their own property. But when someone else comes into the equation, such as a child or pet, that's when someone's free rights end. I subscribe to the idea that if it's yours, you can do what you want with it. However, I don't see children as property since they are living beings, so that's the one thing that I would advocate for a lot more government control over. So then, it really just comes down to when you think someone gets rights. Is it at conception or at birth? Well, I'm not generally one for compromises, but I can make an exception here. I'd say it should be legal, but ban after the first couple of months. I think even if it's a short time, like 3 months, it should be totally fair, because nobody's really going to put off an abortion until that late, and if they do, I think it's reasonable to agree that they could have aborted the baby earlier. Altogether, I am for having a society more open to sex and even drugs, but when children factor in, it's a lot more complicated. The next question is marriage equality, if I support it for homosexuals. I'm socially liberal, so yes. However, the one complication I have with it is that I generally support state laws. Now, I know that's a Republican value, but hear me out. I believe we should have more freedom than less, definitely, but I also believe in the right to make your own domestic laws, rather than having to adhere to centralized laws. I think freedom includes the freedom to give up freedom. I use freedom a lot in that sentence. Basically, though, I don't think anarchy is something to aspire to, but rather than a population deciding their laws dogmatically, or even democratically, individuals should have the right to move somewhere else where they have laws that better suit them. I think there needs to be a place for every kind of person. So, in this sense, I think there should be extremely minimal national laws and have a lot more state and county laws. The issue with this is that if laws are determined by countries and states, this normally affects children. Now, I'm speaking purely philosophically here. There's not a quick answer for how to do this, but I think that freedom needs to end when it starts affecting children. All children, in my book, should be given the same universal rights, and only when they're old enough to move on their own do they get the choice to abandon certain rights for others. Alright, back to the quiz. I looked further on the options, and one of them was to advocate for marriage to be abolished as a legal institution. I actually think this is a good idea, because marriage is pretty much a religious thing. It is almost universal throughout cultures, but with separation of church and state, I don't think there should be any financial benefits or ties, which there are currently, coming from a religious ceremony. Marriage is also generally between two people, which is discriminatory against polygamists. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean I support polygamy or polyamory, but as I've said, consenting adults should have the right to do anything they want. I think rather than also giving polygamous marriage equality, we should just abolish legal marriage altogether, and just have it be a religious choice. The next question is about Planned Parenthood. Should the government fund it? Well, I don't have much of a stance on this, since I honestly don't know much about the organization. I'm actually against welfare, and that's my Republican side speaking. I think any benefits someone wants, they should be able to pay for, and if they don't want the benefits, they can opt out and not have to pay. However, since Planned Parenthood has to do with children, I would say I do support it, because other than freedom, my main concern is that children won't have crappy parents. Parenting and education are the one thing I think governments need to carefully regulate. Next question. Should the government increase environmental regulations to stop climate change? The answer, yes. I actually care a fair amount about this one, even though I don't know a lot about the environment or about climate change. I am a libertarian, and the one thing I hold dearest is usually freedom. But since there's evidence that the planet is changing due to greenhouse gases, and it's been told that the Earth could be at irreversible damage within years, I think this is far more important than someone's freedom. When I was younger, I always thought very conservatively. I actually take pride in that, because it shows how much of an independent thinker I was when I grew up in New York City, where everyone else, including my parents, were social democrats. So I never was much of a tree hugger when I was younger. I was too conservative to care for any sort of hippy-dippy bullshit. But now that our world is basically ending due to fossil fuels, I've kind of shifted my attitude. I care about freedom to an extent, but when we're all going to die, I think it's cause for a little environmental socialism. I'm a lot more in support of the Green Party now, and I might have voted for them had I been of age. The next question asks if I believe the government should stop production on the Dakota Access Pipeline. Now, I don't know much about this, but I heard a little about it in school. If you're not familiar, there was basically an oil company driving an oil pipeline across the border of an Indian reservation. The natives started protesting to get the pipeline relocated off their sacred ground. I think this whole thing is over now, so this is all a bit outdated, and the government did eventually decide to get the pipeline moved. I don't think they built this yet, so for all I know, Trump might counter that decision. Anyway, though, I think the pipeline needs to be relocated, definitely, because the land is owned by natives, and if it's their land, they get to decide what to do with it. If they don't want a big fucking pipe going through it, they can make that decision. Anyway, I don't care too much about this one, but I'm happy with the current outcome. The next question asks if I support the institution of hydraulic fracking to extract deep oil. I don't know what the hell hydraulic fracking is, but it doesn't sound too good for the environment, so I'm gonna say no. I really don't know for sure, but I'd say it's better if we try to find more sustainable energy sources. Now, on to economics. Should governments raise the federal minimum wage? Well, this is complicated, but no. In fact, I don't think there even should be a federal minimum wage. And I know I sound a little utopian capitalist there, but I firmly stand with someone's rights to pay their workers whatever they will work for. The real issue I think we need to focus on is why is there such an economic gap between the rich and the poor? That needs to be evened out somehow, but I don't think the government should intervene and regulate the economy. I don't agree with socialism. Next question. Should welfare recipients be tested for drugs? Well, I support drug legalization, but I also don't think welfare programs should be wasting tax money on druggies who have no future. I pick the alternative choice, which is that the government should end all social welfare programs regardless. Next question asks if the government should make cuts to public spending to reduce national debt. I don't know much about the national debt other than it's big. And I don't really know completely what public spending is, and I don't feel like looking it up right now. I assume it's stuff like parks and museums. I don't think it's incredibly important for the government to be taking our money and spending it on parks and museums anyway, so I'd say yes. The next question asks if we should increase restrictions on buying a gun. Well, I actually disagree with most libertarians on the issue of gun control, because differing from most libertarian issues, this one actually matters. Guns have the potential to kill people, and I like people being killed as much as the next guy, but when people possess dangerous weapons, that's different than just having the personal liberty of something like smoking marijuana, because it infringes on the safety of others. And I know most people buying guns are actually perfectly good people, and they probably aren't going to try and shoot up a school, but I really feel like, do you really need an assault rifle? Like, I'm not saying every person who buys an assault rifle is going to shoot up a school, because that would be ridiculous, but if you don't have an assault rifle, you're probably not going to shoot up a school. Guns are a complicated issue, and I'll probably talk more about them in another video, but I'd say I think it should be left up to the state. Now, should we decriminalize drug use? Yes, definitely. This is one of the issues I'm most outraged about. For one thing, I think marijuana wouldn't hurt to be legalized everywhere, but I also think people should start legalizing all sorts of drugs. Not because I support substance abuse, though it is mighty cool among teens, but because it should be someone's right to do whatever they want with their body. I do think we should try harder to keep drugs out of the possession of children and teens, but legal adults shouldn't have any restrictions of what they can do with their body. Next one asks, do I support affirmative action programs? This is where it'd get real controversial if some people I knew were listening in. But I'd say no, I definitely do not support them. Whether or not it's for a good cause, diversity, it's still discriminatory against ethnic majorities, whether you say so or not, by definition. Also, do I support Obamacare? My parents do, they're Democrats. It doesn't really matter that much to me, honestly, but in philosophy I disagree with any sort of government socialism. It also asks if the government should regulate the price of life-saving drugs. This is actually where it gets complicated. Normally I'd say the government shouldn't regulate any commercial prices, but when it comes down to life or death, that just seems cruel. Ultimately, I think people shouldn't receive anything they don't earn, even if it's important. I would make sure to socialize raising children, though, because they can't earn for themselves, so their well-being shouldn't depend on what their parents can afford. I would also try to make bank loans more flexible, so someone who doesn't have the money currently to afford, for instance, cancer treatment, they could take out a loan and pay it back later at relatively low interest. Do I support marijuana legalization? Yes, definitely. I support the legalization of all drugs, because it falls under personal choice. Next question. Should a photo ID be required for people to vote? Well, honestly, I couldn't care less about that. There's no evidence that voter fraud exists, but I don't think it could really hurt to require an identification. It shouldn't be that hard to get, I think, but there's just not much reason to require it. Should foreign lobbyists be allowed to raise money for American elections? Well, honestly, I really don't know what foreign lobbyists are. As I've said before, I'm not a politician, so I'm really just putting my opinion on what I care about. I'll say yes, but as long as all donations are public knowledge. I think neutrality is good, and that seems to be a pretty neutral stance. Should corporations, unions, and non-profit organizations be allowed to donate to public parties? So this seems about the same, but it's corporations within the U.S. So I'd say, well, this is actually where my liberal side comes in. I do often favor the rich and big businesses, just because I think any money you earn is your own. But I generally think finance should stay out of politics, because that's when we turn from a capitalism to a plutocratic oligarchy, which is an entirely different thing. So I think non-profits and unions should be allowed to donate, but not corporations. Okay, so for education issues, I really dislike how there are only 2 questions, because education is something I care a lot about, and I actually hold some pretty radical leftist views on it. I think not only education, but also childcare should be widely in the hands of the national government, because I want children to be independent of their parents' financial situation. I think one of the biggest issues with capitalism, in fact probably the biggest issue, is that it establishes a strong classist system. And I really do like the capitalist way, though, which is that you get everything you earn and nothing you don't. I think a free market would support this. However, when kids are put into the equation, like I said previously about kids, how they should not be the property of their parents, it makes them dependent on their parents. Ideally, I'd advise some sort of ultra-capitalist utopia with free markets, but the issue with that is that if someone is born into a poor family, they'll stay poor, and if someone is born into a rich family, they'll stay rich. The American dream is that you should be able to get anywhere from anywhere, but it really just doesn't work out like that all the time. Someone whose parents can't afford to send them to college probably aren't going to do as well as someone whose parents can. It's just how our society works. So that's why I would pretty much put minors under a communist system, but all adults would live in a free market world, because they would be responsible for themselves, and only themselves. Anyway, the first question asks if I support increasing taxes for the rich in order to reduce interest rates for college students. I know I just low-key advocated for communism just now, so I'm going to do some damage control and say, that sounds like communism to me, and click no. Do I support Common Core national standards? Well, I do think uniform testing is pretty important. Another funny thing about me is that I really like uniformity. Maybe that makes me sound like a Nazi, but fuck you. I may be a libertarian, but there's something beautiful about uniformity in a nation, especially among children. I also think, morally, it's better if you give all children roughly the same upbringing, so they'll all have the same opportunities in life. Should the U.S. accept refugees from Syria? Yes. This isn't as much about my politics, but just because I'd rather choose to give people a chance than to be afraid of them. I'll be honest, I'm not normally a very compassionate guy, but considering the shit that goes on in Syria, I'd say I'd probably want to move to the U.S. too if I lived there. Should foreign terrorists be given constitutional rights? I don't really give a shit, to be honest. You can do whatever the hell you want with them for all I care. Terrorists pretty much suck, whether they're foreign or not. But I guess there's no reason to torture them needlessly, because as much as we'd all love to do that, it would be brutal and unprofessional. Oh, as for military spending, I don't really care either. I don't know how much we're spending, but I'm sure it's a fine amount. As long as it's something we all benefit from, like protection, I support it. Should officers be required to wear body cameras? You know, I hadn't heard of that, but that's actually a really good idea. I definitely think this would reduce confusion over crime. Maybe it'd be a little more expensive, but it would help us be objective in judging police brutality and police-related offenses. With all this Black Lives Matter stuff, it would be good to get more video footage of incidents like that, so people wouldn't have to blindly side with the cop or the victim. Should convicted felons have the right to vote? Well, I honestly don't like our presidential system as a whole anyway, but I can get to that later. I've honestly got some fucking radical ideas in my head. But I'd say, yeah, they should be able to vote, but only after they've completed their sentence. And solitary confinement for juveniles. Oh my god. Yes, holy shit, definitely ban it. I'd say ban it even for adults. The current criminal justice system sucks ass, and it seriously needs some changes made to it. On this, I'll definitely take the liberal side. Prisons shouldn't be for justice or punishment, they should be for rehabilitation. And though I am a big capitalist, we should have more social programs to rehabilitate people. I'd just completely throw out the old system if I was in control. On to immigration. Should we build a wall along the southern border? No, this wouldn't even stop illegals from coming in. The main way that immigrants enter the U.S. is not by hopping across the border. There's a such thing as airplanes. Should illegal immigrants have access to government-subsidized healthcare? No. As I've said, I don't support government-subsidized healthcare at all. But someone should especially not reap the benefits if they don't pay taxes for it. Should Muslim immigrants be banned from entering the country? No. This is probably the primary reason I don't support President Trump. You should not be able to ban anyone based on their religion. I don't support Islam, but banning anyone based on it would violate the First Amendment. And vaccines. Should kids be required to take them? Well, people in general definitely shouldn't, but since this is an issue involving the safety of children, I don't think this should be up to the parents, so definitely yes. Next one asks if food companies should be required to label their food specifically if it's a GMO. I do think they should have to do that, because people should be able to know what's in the food they're eating. That doesn't mean I don't support GMOs, but everyone should be able to know that. And do I support nuclear energy? I'd say so. I hear that people find it objectionable because of the fear of radiation poisoning, but I also hear that nuclear is pretty safe and really efficient. I think energy is a really important issue that our country needs to tackle, and we really should have gotten Jill Stein elected, because President Trump is probably going to doom us all to a literal hell on earth. In the end, I think we should find energy that's more sustainable. That'll probably include making improvements on solar energy, but until that's possible with science, we should focus on nuclear. Okay, so as you can see, I sided mostly with the third-party candidates, with around 80%, and with Hillary pretty far behind at 60%, and Donald Trump really far behind at only 16%. This really shows how different the Libertarian Party is from Republican, even though most people think of Libertarian as pretty conservative, and how different the Green Party is from Democrat. I was actually really surprised at both how much I matched up with Jill Stein, since she's kind of a hippie, and also how close it came between Gary and Jill. This also shows that though I do not fall into the category of modern liberals, I'm definitely not a conservative, Trump-type Republican. I'm still actually surprised at how little I agree with him on.